Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. In Discovering His Story, we seek to look at both the biblical record and the historical record to see where things might overlap, where people have contact with one another and gain more insight into the Bible, as well as see how Bible people influenced history. We are in the time period we call ancient times, and we've been looking specifically at the civilization of Greece. We looked at Greek culture last time. If you missed that, then go to the archives, take a look at that. The last couple of episodes talk about Greek culture, who the great philosophers and scientists were, and I think if you haven't seen that, you'll find that interesting. Last time we began looking at how Greek culture spread through Alexander the Great. Alexander wanted to fulfill the wishes of his father to conquer Persia. Persia, remember, had long wanted to defeat Greece. Philip of Macedon did conquer Greece and incorporated Greece into his kingdom, so that now Alexander is desiring to go against Persia. In order to do so, he has to cross the Hellespont and defeats the Persians very quickly at the Battle of Granicus, at which the ruler of the Persians, Darius III, was not present. In between, we saw that Alexander solved the mystery of the Gordian knot. If you missed that, go back and take a look at our previous episode. Next, Alexander is going to come in contact with the Persians once again at a place called Issus. This is in November of 333. Realizing that he had underestimated the threat of the Macedonians, Darius III took charge of his army now and maneuvered his men in a surprised march behind the Hellenic advance in order to cut off their line of supply. You can see that reflected on the map. In red, Darius is moving behind Alexander and his forces. Alexander was forced to countermarch, and the stage was set for the battle near the mouth of the Panaris River and the town of Issus. The Persian army was likely 10 times that of Macedon. Things did not go well for the Macedonians in the beginning. Their center phalanx, having to advance across a river and up a fortified bank, suffered severely against the Greek mercenaries waiting for them on the other side. It appears that 120 Macedonian officers were slain here, and the Macedonians were forced to retreat back across the river. On the left flank, the Thessalian struggled against the outnumbering mass of Persian heavy cavalry that faced them, delivering charges and retreating again to buy time. Then the Hippastists, led by Alexander on foot, delivered an assault. You can find them in the center of the line in light blue. They were trying to punch a hole through the Persian line right in the middle. Now, if you look at battles throughout history, ancient times, certainly up through our own conflict between the states in this country, The idea when you have armies lining up against one another is to flank them, that is to try to get around the outside edge and thereby either be able to attack from behind or at least to draw some of their soldiers out to the edges, or to attack right in the middle. And if you think they've got a soft middle, you attack through there and divide them. So those are two of the main strategies, and Alexander is putting those into effect here. He's trying to drive right through the middle of the Persian line. The Agrarians, too, drove back a mass of Persian skirmishers menacing Alexander's far right. You can see that on the upper right-hand side of the battle line there. You see the Persians are attempting to flank them and are not able to do so. Alexander then mounted a horse at the head of his companions, that's what that group was called, and led a direct assault against Darius and his bodyguards, causing them to flee from the battlefield. Now, the slide we're looking at here is from a mosaic in the city of Pompeii, which, as you remember, was destroyed by a volcano. But there's a mosaic of the battle painted there on a wall of one of the buildings. Amazing, and that's been found, and you're able to see this much of the painting. On the right, you see the ornate chariot with huge wheels drawn by two black horses in retreat, with the regal eastern-looking commander looking back in fear. You see him there? On the left, we see where his anguished eyes are directed. They're directed at the clean-shaven young European, bareheaded, tousle-haired, and wearing a Medusa-decorated breastplate, determinedly urging forward his spirited horse. This is a close-up then of the two figures. Darius III on the right. Can you see the fear in his face? Whoever painted this did a masterful job. And Alexander on the left, the determination moving forward on his horse. Alexander then saw his left flank and center in trouble, and allowing Darius to flee, he crashed into the rear of the Greek mercenaries. The Greek mercenaries broke up and started retreating from the battlefield as well. The Persians saw that their great king had gone and that the battle was being lost, and they abandoned their positions and fled in full rout. The Hellenic cavalry, the Greeks, pursued the fleeing Persians for as long as there was light. As with most ancient battles, significant carnage occurred after the battle as the pursuing Greeks slaughtered their crowded, disorganized foe. Ptolemy mentioned that while pursuing Darius, Alexander and his bodyguards came upon a ravine which they hastily and easily crossed on the piled up bodies of dead Persians. It was a decisive victory for Alexander in this extremely mountainous area that opened up all of Asia and marked the beginning of the end of the Persian Empire. Now, following the battle, the wife, two daughters, and mother of Darius III were captured, having accompanied Darius on the campaign. Surely the presence of these important female companions demonstrated the overconfidence of Darius. Alexander treated these women with great respect and even ended up marrying one of the daughters. Now lest you give that more weight than it should have, Alexander married a lot of princesses in many different places that he conquered. But it is something, and she was alive. Well, Alexander defeated the Persians for good at Arbela, which is also called Gaugamela, which literally means the camel's house. Alexander's troops moved east across the Tigris River deeper into Persian territory. After the Macedonian army had crossed the Tigris, a near total lunar eclipse occurred on the 20th and 21st of September, 331 BC. An ominous sign for someone. You just got to determine who's it ominous for, the Persians or the Greeks, the Macedonians. Well, the flat plain of Gaugamela was chosen by Darius III for the battleground, hoping to overwhelm Alexander with his superior forces. However, the forces of Macedon were able to defeat the Persians using superior strategy. Following the battle, Darius III retreated to Babylon, where he assembled his remaining troops that had been occupied elsewhere, waiting for the end to come. But it is not to be yet. Before Alexander pursues Darius III to Babylon, there are some other places that he has in mind to conquer. And so the further expansion of the Greek Empire takes place as he heads south. Oh, I forgot a slide, a couple slides here that I forgot to show you. One is that Darius employed what are called scythed chariots. You can see the chariots there with a blade sticking out of them. And so that's a rather difficult weapon to fight against. If you've got chariots, it's going to do damage there, as well as any people on foot or horses. And I wanted to show you the strength of the armies here too. The forces of Darius III, you can see the estimates of the infantry run from 40 to 200,000. The cavalry, 12 to 45,000. The Persian immortals, that's the elite band of Persian soldiers, fighters. Greek mercenaries, cavalry, archers. There's the Scythe chariots. War elephants were employed. So Darius III has anywhere from 52,000 to 268,000. I know that's a wide range, but compare that to the numbers of Alexander, where he has just 31,000 infantry, heavy infantry, 9,000 light, and 7,000 cavalry. So he's vastly outnumbered, and yet he is a greater strategist than Darius III and is able to defeat him. All right, so we have seen Alexander move from Macedonia and Greece over into Asia Minor, was successful at the Battle of Issus, and then over to Gaugamela, and now he's heading south towards the city of Tyre in January through August of 332. So on the way, he defeats Damascus and also Sidon as they are along the way towards Tyre. And he next comes to the great city of Tyre. Now, it's so important because basically it's been undefeated. If you remember, Nebuchadnezzar tried to defeat Tyre and went away without having been able to do so. And that's because the citizens of Tyre had an escape plan. And it's going to take a brilliant plan by Alexander to overcome that. The citizens of Tyre before had escaped previous invaders by moving onto an adjacent and well-fortified island in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, I think sometime after Nebuchadnezzar, when they had escaped to the island, they decided just to go ahead and live there, and they abandoned the old city of Tyre, and we're now living on this island, which is the new Tyre. But the buildings on the mainland might be destroyed even when they were living there, but their lives would be safe, and they always could go back and rebuild. But now they figured they're even safer just staying out there on that island and engaging in the trade that was so much a part of Tyrian life, as they were Phoenicians, as you remember. By the time of Alexander, like I said, they had moved to the island permanently, still thinking they're protected from an invasion. However, Alexander instructed his soldiers to take the rubble of the city that had been destroyed previously and throw it into the sea and eventually make a causeway to the island. You see it pictured there. This is another drawing showing the causeway in red, 200 feet wide. Maybe we can get a close-up here so we can see some of the printing a little bit better. Up at the top, you see Alexander charters 250 ships to blockade the harbors. The whole island was surrounded by a great rampart nearly 170 feet high. And the number of inhabitants almost doubled during Alexander's siege. And then on the bottom we see the layout of the Egyptian harbor, which is now submerged. So that's the plan, is to throw this rubble into the sea and create a causeway, which he was able to do. Here's a drawing of how it must have looked to the citizens of Tyre as this large causeway is coming into existence, accompanied by the siege engines that are there as well, ready to invade and knock over the walls and go over the walls of Tyre. Here's a picture of what one of those siege engines might have looked like. You can see their wheels on the bottom. There are different levels. You can see windows all the way up for firing out arrows and so on. And the floor goes in a circular pattern. So it doesn't look like it has steps. It looks like you go circularly up to the different levels. And that's what's coming. Now, here is what it may have looked like. Again, another drawing as Alexander is attempting to breach the walls of Tyre. Now, the citizens of Tyre did not go down without a fight. They remember, were masterful sailors. And so they sent many ships out against Alexander, firing upon the soldiers that were building this causeway. And Alexander had to employ ships of his own as well. So it was more difficult than just building this causeway out of the rubble of the city. But essentially, it cleaned the city and probably fulfills the prophecy made in Ezekiel. I'm not sure, it was chapter 33, 34 maybe, where I think it's 34, where he said, it's prophesied that the city of Tyre would be so bare, no stones left there, that all the flat stones would be used for fishermen to dry their nets. Now in Ezekiel 34, it's given right before the conquest of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the main character there. But I think the end result, after Nebuchadnezzar destroys the city, the rubble's still there. And it would be a later time when Alexander would come along and move the rubble so that it was the place that Ezekiel foretold. So that's the way the drawing looked then. Here's how it looks now. Now, of course, what you see is that causeway became permanent, and not only permanent, but as time went on, dirt and so on accumulated so that it is no longer a thin causeway out to the island, but it looks like it's just an isthmus. What was an island is now connected very strongly to the mainland. So the strategy of Alexander enabled him to conquer the city of Tyre. After conquering it, he killed 8,000 and enslaved 30,000. Well, having conquered Tyre in September 332, Alexander planned to proceed to the great city of Gaza. But on the way loomed the famous city of Jerusalem. As Alexander's army approached Jerusalem, the inhabitants were fearful. Word travels fast about an invader conquering all the cities with which he comes in contact. So as Alexander came near the city, they decided to send a delegation of Jewish leaders out to meet him, led by Hudua, the high priest. And their idea was to implore him to spare the city. Well, providentially, Alexander had a dream just before coming to Jerusalem. I believe it was the night before. And in his dream, there was a man approaching him wearing strange apparel and a large hat with strange writing on it. When he saw the high priest approaching him, he realized that what he was witnessing was exactly what he had seen in his dream. The funny writing in his dream was Hebrew letters on the crown of the high priest. The high priest proceeded to take Alexander into the city and to show him the prophecies of Daniel concerning his defeat of the Persians, which had been made some 225 years before. Upon the reading of Daniel 8, Alexander fell down and worshipped Hudua. Alexander spared the city, passing around it. So the city of Jerusalem was saved. Using the same siege engines that he had employed at Tyre, Alexander unleashed 3 unsuccessful assaults on Gaza before the Macedonian army was finally able to storm the city. At one point, an Arab mercenary pretended to surrender, and after being taken to the Macedonian camp, attacked Alexander, who suffered a minor injury before the Arab was struck down. Following their victory, all the males of Gaza were put to death, and the women and children were enslaved. The military commander of the city, who was unwilling to bow before Alexander, was dealt with in a special way. A rope was forced through his ankles, probably between the ankle bone and the Achilles tendon, and he was then dragged alive by chariot beneath the walls of the city until he died. From 332 to 331, Alexander proceeded to Egypt, where he was welcomed as a deliverer from the Persians. There he built the city of Alexandria, named after him, of course, with walls that were 6 miles in circuit, as well as building a port on the Mediterranean Sea. On his way to the Siwa oasis in western Egypt, near the Libyan border, you see there Libya beside Egypt, and he's traveling out to an oasis out there, a special oasis which is supposed to have magical influence. On the way, Alexander and his men became lost. They were saved by the appearance of crows. So upon reaching the oasis, Alexander was crowned Pharaoh by the oracle, the priest, declaring him to be a god. Alexander asked the oracle, "Who is my father?" The oracle replied that his father was the sun. Alexander wrote his name in a cartouche and built a small temple at Thebes. He founded 12 cities named Alexandria. You've got a good name for a city, don't let it go to waste. Well, from there, Alexander turned his attention once more to the elusive Darius III. Darius III attempted to dissuade Alexander from conquering more of Persian territory through diplomacy. First, he offered 10,000 talents as a ransom for the safe return of his family. Secondly, he proposed land in Asia Minor for Alexander to stop. Thirdly, he suggested the idea that Alexander rule with him as co-ruler, accept one of his daughters in marriage, and receive 30,000 talents in silver. Alexander refused all of these offers and determined to meet Darius III on the battleground. Because what fun was there without a battle? Alexander defeated Darius III, taking Babylon. Throughout his conquests, Alexander attempted to integrate with the conquered peoples by encouraging mass marriage between his men and the widows of men they killed. And of course he did that himself, as I mentioned. He married princesses all over the areas that he captured, as well as naming cities after himself. Well, Alexander in 327 invaded India. Having subdued, and by the way, there are a lot of battles that I'm not going over. If you want to find more history of the battles, you can look them up online. There are just too many battles for me to deal with them all here, so I'm just trying to hit some of the highlights. But in 327, he goes all the way to India. Having subdued the Persian Empire, he went to India and entered into that territory through the famous Khyber Pass. Various tribes of present-day Pakistan offered resistance, but the Macedonians were able to persevere through a series of fierce battles. The greatest battle in this new region took place near the river Hydaspes in the region ruled by King Porus. Despite Porus's strong defense and the use of war elephants, Alexander achieved a decisive victory. Impressed by Porus's valor, Alexander reinstated him as a satrap or governor of his own territory and even granted him additional lands. However, the monsoon season, the unfamiliar terrain, and the weariness of his troops presented significant challenges. Additionally, his soldiers were increasingly reluctant to continue marching further and further into unknown territories. So there at last, he was compelled by his battle-weary troops to return westward to Babylon in 327. At the Indus River, he wept, for he had no more worlds to conquer. The consequences of his defeating the Persian Empire is that he was able to take cities of Persia without resistance, including Persepolis. He was considered not only the leader of the allied Greeks, but as the king of Asia, and he allowed his Greek allies to return home, though many of them stayed on. He planned to continue his conquests, went to where Darius had fled, but eventually decided to go back home. So here he is, having gone to India. There's the Battle of Hydaspes and the war elephants. Okay, there he is, no more worlds to conquer. Alexander constructed a fleet to transport some troops down the Indus River. You see there on the extreme right. He took part of his forces west by land, leaving the fleet to sail and meet up with him again at the head of the Persian Gulf. But they had a desperate time crossing the Gradosian Desert, you see there on the bottom right. But in the spring of 323, he was back in Babylon. Having returned to Babylon, he had plans to rebuild the city to its former glory. Thus, in 7 or 8 years, he accomplished the most dazzling military conquest in human history. But in 323, Alexander the Great died at the age of 32 from dysentery, possibly from malaria with complications from alcoholism during a drunken orgy. He was the mighty king of Daniel 11. But the question for the next 20 years was, who will succeed Alexander? And we'll find out just how that succession took place when you come back with us next week on Discovering His Story here at YCTV. Don't forget, you can see previous episodes by going to yctv.org and looking on the archives, and you'll see all of the episodes recorded so far.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.